Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived in Abu Dhabi on Thursday for a state visit to the United Arab Emirates. What's the significance of this visit? The first by a Chinese head of state in 29 years. And auto industry leaders blasted Trump's proposed 25% tariffs on autos and auto parts at Thursday's U.S. Commerce Department hearing, warning against the effects of raised prices, American job losses, and a damaged global supply chain. Will these words of caution make President Trump slam on the brakes? Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. But first, my personal take on the latest announcement of President Trump's intention to impose additional tariffs on all of China's exports to the U.S. President Trump has threatened to put tariffs on all $500 billion worth of Chinese imports to that country. In an interview on Friday, he made the threat, citing Beijing's retaliation against America's initial tariffs on some $50 billion of goods. If his $50 billion trade tariffs were bullying, this latest threat amounts, in my eyes, to a trade suicide attack. It will not only hurt bilateral trade and economic development in China and other economies, but also hurt U.S. businesses and consumers deeply. First of all, the China-U.S. economies are so intertwined that many imports from China are actually produced by American businesses operating in the country. Statistics show products made by these companies account for $127 billion, some one-third of China's total exports to the U.S. To impose tariffs on all Chinese imports to the U.S. would hurt the interests of American businesses in China. Secondly, this kind of unilateral behavior will also hurt other economies, as many of the products produced in China and exported to the U.S. also have components provided by other economies. According to an OECD report, China's exports typically carry over 30% of foreign components, and exports of more sophisticated goods often carry 70% of foreign content. It is clear President Trump's threat will not only trigger a backlash from China, but all of the economies linked together in the global supply and value chains. At stake is U.S. economic recovery and the world's economy, which is only slowly walking out of the shadow of the 2008 financial crisis. Thirdly, and most importantly, this will make a whole host of U.S. consumer products much more expensive. Trade with China has been attributed to saving the average American family some $800 on an annual basis. It's unimaginable that a day would pass without an American buying something made in China. Even Larry Kudlow, Trump's top economic advisor, said Americans have benefited from high-quality but low-priced products from China. What President Trump threatened to do is to punish the ordinary pals and gals on the streets, many of whom have voted to put him in power. As to the potential consequences, President Trump seems to take it very lightly. With the midterm elections on the horizon, when asked what if the stock markets were to go down, he said, if it does, it does. So, does anyone, including himself, understand the economics behind his decisions? Does he really care? When an extremist prepares to detonate a suicide bomb, they're also filled with confidence and fearlessness, thinking they will go to heaven. What if it hurts innocent people? Well, if it does, it does. So this is like a suicide bomb threat President Trump has lashed out. The sad thing is, he is not aware of it. What's even sadder, it will be too late when he is. Now let's start our discussions. And Chinese President Xi Jinping kicked off his first overseas trip Thursday since his second term began in March. The United Arab Emirates, lavish in its hospitality, was President Xi's first stop and also the first time in 29 years that a Chinese head of state visited. China and the UAE established diplomatic ties 34 years ago in 1984. Now, the UAE is both China's largest export market and second largest trading partner in the Gulf region, while China has been the largest trading partner of the UAE for many years. Last year, bilateral trade reached nearly $52 billion. That's up 15% year on year. The UAE is also one of the first countries to embrace the Belt and Road Initiative envisioned by President Xi Xi in 2013 and a founding member of the China-led Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. So what's the significance of President Xi's visit, and how can UAE promote a BNR initiative in the Middle East? Joining me for the discussion are Professor Wenping, Senior Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Mr. Ghanbar Naderi, correspondent with Tehran-based Press TV, and Professor Macharia Munene, Professor of History and International Relations at the United States International University in Nairobi, Kenya. The warmest welcome to all of my guests. Professor He, let me go to you first. President Xi's three-day state visit to the UAE comes before he heads to Senegal, Rwanda, South Africa, where he will attend the 10th BRICS Summit in Johannesburg before he goes to Mauritius. Now, why do you think Beijing picked the UAE as the first stop during his first overseas trip since his second term began?
Yes, among all those 5 countries that this time President Xi will visit, the UAE stands as the only one in the Middle East. So this only one is not that simple, because it also represents the whole of the region, like this Arabic states and also the Middle East. We also know that all the area, the Middle East, has been regarded as a very important road for this One Belt One Road initiative. So even during the in the 2,000 years ago, this Silk Road itself, this name comes from those very traditional, those trade roads linked with Asia and also the Arabic states, and also go beyond that area. So those are our, ancestors. They have been trading between those tea and also those silk made in eastern part of the continent, and then with those perfume and also pearl, those things made in the Middle East. So that road now is the time to revive them. And as you just introduced, that the trade between China and the UAE now has been developed so fast. Now, comparing with the time when we established the diplomatic ties in the year 1984, now it's almost 800 times more. 800-folded more. So that's and shows a huge potential. And also we have developed a very good relation, like those upstream, this energy resources cooperation, and also like industrial cooperation, and the financial cooperation, and even Chinese tourists. Now I think it's flooded to the UAE because without visa.
Right, indeed, a lot on the plate. Let me go to Mr. Naderi in Tehran. Let's look at the grand welcome the UAE has designed for President Xi. We see Chinese flags decorating its landmark skyscrapers, not only in Abu Dhabi, but also in Dubai. Chinese lanterns have been hung in prestigious hotels, and we understood that even 2 local mobile carriers are substituting their usual top-left company names with Welcome Pres China. Are these details exceptional or phenomenal in your eyes?
Well, these are important for one simple fact that, as you just mentioned, China exports around $50 billion worth of goods to the UAE, but we know that it doesn't have such a big population to consume that amount of trade. As you know, Iran is under sanctions by the United States, and for that reason, Iran has to import goods from the UAE also. So this means that the UAE is also re-exporting Chinese goods to Iran. That's what makes the Chinese president's visit to UAE so important. At the end of the day, we are not worried, because unlike so many other countries in the world, especially in the West, when we hear that Chinese officials, the leaders, are visiting the regional countries, it's music to our ears, because we know that China means well. It doesn't mean harm to the regional countries, and it favors trade, dialogue, and of course multilateralism or globalism. For that reason and no other, we are very happy to see that China has finally taken the initiative to take, the Chinese leader has taken the initiative to take a visit to the region. We hope that he carries with him the message of peace. We know that we have serious problems with our neighbors, and hopefully the Chinese leader will act some kind of mediator in order to sort out our differences with our Arab neighbors. At the end of the day, this is a win-win visit for us also.
Yeah, let me go to Professor Munene in Nairobi. Prior to the visit, President Xi wrote the article. I think we saw that image there. Work together, create a better future, which was published in 2 UAE national newspapers. He wrote, and I quote, "I look forward to working with the UAE leaders to draw up a blueprint for China-UAE cooperation so as to unlock its full potentials and advance China-UAE relations at a higher level and speed, and build a China-UAE community of a shared future in Belt and Road cooperation." In your eyes, what's the potential in China-UAE cooperation and its implications for countries in the region?
Thank you. The potential is great. For one, the United Arab Emirates has good connections with other Arab countries. It's not known to be having serious problems with the neighbors. And the acceptance of China as a major player in the world is being manifested in the Middle East through the United Arab Emirates. They have good relations. They are working on the infrastructure, the One Belt, One Road initiative, and the UAE has, of course, access to a lot of oil and energy that China needs and would like. So there is an expectations of mutual exchanges and benefits in the long. But the more important part is the opening up of the Middle East to China's interaction on both sides, so that they can both benefit. So it is bigger than simply visiting Abu Dhabi.
Right.
It is the Middle East that's now accepting, given the dynamics of global geopolitics, which right now are in a flux, especially in the West.
Okay, Professor Wenping, let's follow up on that question. She also said that China, and in his article, that China and the UAE have become important partners in communicating and coordinating international and regional affairs. Given Beijing's subtle Middle East policy, as we have heard a little bit, where it wants to balance its relationship with everybody, how will China collaborate with its Arab partners on regional issues like immigration crisis and security?
Well, we all know, like in the Middle East, there are a lot of conflicts and confrontation going on in the Syria war, and also the conflict between Iran and Saudi. But when we look about the UAE, we will find the UAE has taken, relatively speaking, I think it's quite a neutral stance. So it's not get involved in some hot spots or bias with who and who. So this neutral stance also gives his that kind of special position, can be moving around with different players. Like China, we are normally we are not a traditional player in that part of the area, but we are not saying we are stand aside just for doing nothing. So in recent years, especially in recent 5 years also, particularly after President Xi Jinping took the office, and China has becoming quite active now in playing our constructive role in the Middle East. For example, in terms of Palestine and the Israel conflict, China invited both the leaders from Palestine and Israel to Beijing, and President Xi put forward those proposals. So I think both China and the UAE were both neutral stances. So that's why we can work together and maybe joint put forward some idea.
Okay. Let me go to Mr. Naderi again in Tehran. The Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, also hailed President Xi's visit, calling it historic, and tweeting that he has full confidence in the Chinese president's vision and seeks to build on this historic visit to realize our common goals. What are these common goals in China and UAE cooperation, especially under the Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, that's a good question. It's the same goal that we are aspiring, which is regional peace and security. President Xi is not just a messenger of peace to UAE, he's also a messenger of peace for the rest of the region. If you talk about the huge volume of trade that China is doing with the regional countries, with the Persian Gulf, Arab and the Iranian states, it is huge. I think that China has a winning card, and that is, as you just mentioned, trust, regional trust.
Okay.
Iran doesn't trust the United States, even the European Union, but we do trust China, and we do hope that China will use its influence, its goodwill gestures, its trade, its volume of trade and influence, and the fact that it is now a major player in the region and beyond, in order to help us somehow sort out our differences with our neighbors. This way, we can increase the volume of our trade, we can get China into the region, we can seek help from China in order to ensure security for everyone, which is, by the way, going to pave the way for better relations, for better trade, a larger volume of trade between us and, of course, China. So, as I said, it is a huge step on the part of President Xi.
Okay, thank you so much. We have to leave it there. Mr. Ghanbar Naderi, correspondent with Press TV, Professor Macharia Munene from the United States International University in Nairobi, Kenya, and in Beijing, Professor Wenping, Senior Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. You have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, we'll take a short break, and when I come back, President Trump is revving up a trade war, and automakers are the largest targets. I'll look at how these new tariffs would hit auto companies and trickle down to everyone, everyday consumers. Stay with me. The Trump administration is accelerating its trade war, and automakers around the world are under fire this time. Auto industry leaders and trade groups denounced President Trump's proposed 25% tariff on imported autos and auto parts at Thursday's U.S. Commerce Department hearing. A probe was launched by that department under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 on May 23rd, and hearings must be held before the plan goes ahead. At the hearing, many argued a tax of 25% on imports will increase costs on American-made cars as well, resulting in decreased production and job losses. Representatives from the governments of the EU, Canada, Mexico and Japan, among others, also criticized the tariffs, citing concerns over disrupting the global supply chain and interwoven relationships within the industry. Can these voices of dissent cause Trump to make a U-turn? Given the criticism roaring from the auto industry itself, is the tariff threat a bargaining chip for something else on President Trump's wish list? And what will be the long-term damage to the global auto industry and consumers, and also China, if the tariffs get the green light? Joining me from Hong Kong is Dr. Edward Xie, CEO of Gaofeng Advisory Company and author of the book China's Disruptor, and in Beijing, Xin Lei, Chief Editor of China Automotive Review. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Dr. Xie, let me go to you first. Auto business leaders, trade groups and unions, as well as think tanks, government representatives from abroad, and even the President and CEO of U.S. Chamber of Commerce himself are criticizing Trump's auto tariffs threats, saying, Trump, don't do it. What does the scope of voices say about the severity of this tariff threat?
Yeah, the tariffs is going to create a lot of threats to the entire auto industry, as you know, because it's simply going to increase the cost of the product, and therefore it's going to create more pressure on the consumer who would want to buy cars. So in general, that's going to be a problem, and also it's going to perhaps affect the jobs in the auto industries. So I think to a lot of people who are very concerned about this, the concern is quite genuine.
Now, U.S. Chamber of Commerce President and CEO Thomas Donahoe also said in May, if the tariff proposal is carried out, it would deal a staggering blow to the very industry it purports to protect. He added the U.S. auto industry is prospering as never before. Production has doubled over the past decade. It exports more than any other industry, and it employs nearly 50% more Americans than it did in 2011. But a representative from the United Auto Workers spoke in favor of the potential tariffs, saying trade has hurt American workers, driving jobs into low-wage countries like Mexico and Canada and China in recent decades. So, Mr. Xing, who has a point here?
Well, I would side with Mr. Donohue because, Trump's move, to impose the tariffs in the first place, trying to keep jobs. But if you raise the tariffs, the average consumer, they're going to have to buy the car, they're going to have to service their vehicles, and if these prices go up, they probably drive less, they go to the dealerships less, and then there's less service for the vehicles. Then there's a unintended consequence. You have less production, less import, less jobs.
The auto industry works based on a global supply chain, as we have said over and over again. So, Dr. Xi, what are the concerns to the auto industry on a global scale?
You're right. The whole supply chain in the auto industry has globalized over the last couple of decades. There's a lot of reliance across one another, across national borders. So, if one country, in this case is the U.S., who want to make a one-sided decision on trying to sort of disrupt the global supply chain, the impact is not going to be just on the U.S. side. It's going to impact many other countries who are involved in the global supply chain, and the implication could be very serious.
And China and the U.S. are, as we know already, deeply entrenched in trade tensions, and more seems to be coming. Mr. Xi, what would be these auto part tariffs mean for China? What difference would these tariffs make to China specifically?
Well, first of all, the auto industry is pretty global. I mean, a couple of examples is General Motors exports Buicks made in Shanghai back to the U.S. Volvo exports Volvos made in Chengdu back to Europe. Now, so for the Chinese auto industry, Volvo just decided, I think earlier today, to move some of the production from China back to Europe. So you're going to see this shift of production. And for Chinese companies who are looking into entering the U.S. market, this is something they need to consider, because one company is trying to enter next year, and how is that going to change? We don't know.
And also, Thomas Donahue said that these tariffs aren't about national security at all, but rather the Trump administration has already signaled its true objective is to leverage this tariff threat in trade negotiations with Mexico, Canada, Japan, the European Union and South Korea. That these allies provide nearly all U.S. auto imports and are among America's closest partners. Neither they nor these imports endanger our national security in any way. Dr. Xi, do you agree?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this sort of international trade issues, but I think there's a pretty precise definition of what national security really means. I could understand if the industries or products involved are somewhat related to military defense and so on, then one can say national security could be a problem. But when it comes to automotive manufacturing, it's pretty hard-pressed to really try to relate that with national security. So I cannot understand that, and I think it's actually quite unreasonable. But if it's gonna be imposed by the U.S. President Donald Trump, then it's it's going to be quite complicated. And I truly believe that the real motive is not so much just on the tariffs, but perhaps bargaining chip for renegotiation of some kind of regional agreement.
Mr. Xi, you are nodding. Do you agree with that kind of reasoning?
Well, I mean, I just learned a new word today. It's called plurilateral sectoral deal. It's aside from the WTO agreement where different countries can reach a kind of a, I don't know if you want to call it under the table agreement. So you're going to see. I don't think it's an issue of national security, more bargaining chip. Donald Trump, he's a businessman first and foremost. So you want to benefit your country the most, then
Well, he's also President of the United States, the biggest country in the international community,
right,
where you have a stake, right, to be responsible and not just being a businessman. Dr. Xi, if President Trump is really abusing this tariff, this Section 232, to use it as an excuse to get something else, what does that say about U.S.'s reputation for doing businesses, brokering deals, and respecting its own laws?
Well, the U.S. President ought to be the carrier of the values of the United States as a country. United States, has really represented a set of values that are related to liberalism, globalization, openness, and democracy. But with President Trump, we're actually seeing a lot of what he's trying to do is going backwards. So I think this is going to create a major credibility issue with the USA in terms of what they're going to do next. We don't know.
Probably a bigger credibility issue instead of a credibility issue, I'm afraid. Mr. Xi, President Trump is the first president to impose tariffs under Section 232 with steel and aluminum, but the auto case has actually already been investigated several times by the Commerce Department since it was granted authority to conduct such investigations in the 1980s. In most cases, however, Commerce Department either concluded there was no national security threat or the president decided not to take any trade action. Is there going to be any difference this time?
Well, the difference this time is Trump. that's first and foremost. But I mean, the global, I mean, the economy is global, the auto industry is global, so it's Trump against the world. So
that's kind of helpless. I mean, the tone of the discussion is rather sad, I must say. Okay, finally, Dr. Xie, which car would you recommend then Americans to go buy right now before the prices spike? Should the U.S. start investing in high-speed trains, maybe?
Good question. Of course, if the major tariff is going to be with Canada and Mexico, you try to look at what are the major products or models that are being imported from these countries, and I think mostly trucks, in particular light-duty trucks. So if I were an American living in America right now, I would go buy a light-duty truck today. Should they invest in a high-speed train? Yeah, of course, but they should have done that many years ago. I think the U.S. transportation has to rely too much on automotive and not enough in public transportation, in particular in rail transport. Is it too late? Maybe a little bit too late, but it would be a good idea for them to think about it.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Many thanks to my two guests from Hong Kong, Dr. Edward Xie, CEO of Gaofeng Advisory Company and author of the book China's Disruptor, and in the Beijing studio, Xing Lei, Chief Editor of China Automotive Review. And that's all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.